I maybe have more stories to tell, but that's because I remember them.
We're never too old to learn something new.
I'd say relax and speak to everybody, and you'll get many, many friends.
Good morning and welcome back to a new episode of Elder Wisdom Stories from the Green Bench. I'm one of your co-hosts, Kathy Buckworth, and I'm joined as usual on the Green Bench by my good friend, Evelyn Brindle. Good morning, Evelyn.
Good morning, Kathy. Hope everything is going well and looking forward to our guests and the interview with her today.
I am too. I really enjoyed the book, and we're going to get into everything that Ashton Applewhite does. But it raises such an important topic and one that we deal with every day, which is the topic of ageism. And I know, Evelyn, I am 61 years old and I work in television. So I've certainly been told we're going to go in another direction when I've been working. So I've certainly felt ageism at work. I felt it certainly, in my personal life. What about yourself, Evelyn? Have you had any recent experiences with ageism, and how did that make you feel?
Well, I think there are always some incidents that occur, where a person selling something to you either totally calls you dearie, or if you're at a counter, sometimes they totally ignore you and go to a younger customer. But the biggest area I think I know a number of friends as well have experienced is in the medical field.
Right.
I've been fortunate with a lot of very caring and good doctors through my life. But there have been some incidents recently where, you're seeing a specialist perhaps, and they aren't always too nice. They're more patronizing. You'll ask a question about what you should do about something that's affecting you, and they'll say, "Well, at your age, what do you expect?"
Oh, gee.
And, it's not the kind of response you want to get or like to get.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And I think we receive ageism in a couple of ways. One, sort of flippantly, if somebody calls you miss when you're, clearly not, or things like that, or to what you're talking about more seriously in terms of, medical concerns and things like that. So we're going to dive into this today, Evelyn, with someone who's an expert in the field, and that is Ashton Applewhite. So thrilled to have Ashton on the show today. Author and activist Ashton Applewhite has been recognized by the New York Times, the New Yorker, National Public Radio, and the American Society on Aging as an expert on ageism. She blogs at This Chair Rocks, also the name of her best-selling book. She speaks widely at venues that have ranged from the TED main stage to United Nations, and has written for Harper's, Playboy, the New York Times, and is the voice of Yo, Is That Ageist? I love that title. And so many other things that we're going to get into today. So welcome, Ashton, to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So we're going to dive right in here, Ashton, if that's okay with you. And for our listeners, I think we know what ageism is, but I'd love to hear you define ageism for us.
Sure. Yeah, it's been gratifying to see how many people now do know what the word is, but of course a lot of people don't. It's sort of late to bleep onto the radar alongside a lot of other isms like racism and sexism. And the dictionary definition is discrimination and stereotyping on the basis of age. We are being ageist, and we're all ageist all the time. Me too. Anytime we make an assumption about someone or a group of people on the basis of how old we think they are. You're too old for that, or you're too young for that, whether that is a job or a haircut or a relationship. Ageism cuts both ways. It is any judgment on the basis of age.
I'm really glad that you raised that it cuts to young people as well. You're too young for that. That's too old for you.
Yeah. What could that young person possibly know? Well, find out. Maybe nothing, but maybe a person 40 years older wouldn't know anything about it either.
And I think, when we talk about ageism, we mostly think about people being ageist against older people. I think that's a natural sort of where we go. But you're right, it cuts across everything. What?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I found in your book a quote which I thought was really interesting. Which was, "Ageism is a prejudice against our own future selves," and it's so true. I mean, in terms of not only is it against our own future selves, but we do it to ourselves sometimes. Self ageism is a real thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, every form of bias has an internalized part of it, piece of it. That's one way in which bias manifests in the ideas that all of us around age and also around race and gender. What do girls do that boys shouldn't do, or vice versa, and so on. Any culture is filled with messages about those roles and stereotypes, and we internalize them, typically unconsciously without realizing it, and they become part of our identity. So the first and most important step which is a little bit counterintuitive, but we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. So is to look for ways in which we are ageist, to think about when you make an assumption about someone, or say a friend's, seeing someone new, how old are they? Why do we want to know? What changes in our mind when we have a number? Try to become conscious about the way we think about age, because we all make assumptions on the basis of it. And we have to become aware of that and then think, oh, gee, was that a positive assumption, a negative assumption? Where did that come from? Because that is internalized bias, and most of it is unconscious. And we need to start with that. Once we see it on ourselves, then we can start to see it in the world around us. And that's when it gets fun. That's when it gets interesting. It's no fun to see bias inside yourself, but it is liberating to say, oh, yeah, it's in me, but it's in me because it's everywhere around me. And we can come together and do something about that.
Yeah, and I once had a friend who was 50 at the time say something about somebody was going skydiving or doing something, and she said, "We all need to stop doing things like that. We're too old for that." I'm like, you can speak for yourself if you want, but not that I'm going skydiving. Don't get me wrong. But it was the way that she sort of grouped us all together, and I think that's what happens. It affects a whole demographic. So why does ageism matter?
You might be too lazy. You might be too smart. You might be too poor. There's any number of reasons, but there's someone younger than you that's up for that. There's someone older than you that isn't, and vice versa. It's never actually about age.
That's right. We've had 90-year-old skydivers on this show before, so it's never about age. So what are some of the practical ways that we can sort of support efforts to combat ageism in our own communities? What are some of the actions that we can take?
It's utterly individual. Of course, it depends on how you relate to your community, where you live, what kind of person you are. I think the most important thing to realize is you can't start too small. You can't start too late. That even if, and I don't even, why did I even qualify that? Let me that way. I'll finish the sentence. Even if all you do is start thinking differently about your own attitude towards your own aging, or the aging process of someone you're close to, a friend, that is a huge move, because changing yourself is hard, right? If you change one little piece of how you relate to age and aging, that will change the way you are in the world. That might change the way you feel when you walk out the door. It might change how you organize your social life. It might change what you listen to. It's going to be different for everybody. There's no right way to go about it. There's no one way to go about it. But it starts with educating yourself. And then the next step is hopefully to speak up or say something when you encounter ageism in the world. You talked about doctors being patronizing. There's the old gag that, I stopped. If a doctor says, what do you expect at your age? It's time to find a new doctor. I say in my TED talk, I stopped blaming my sore knee on my age when I realized that my other knee doesn't hurt and it's just as old, right? So
Right.
call out your doctor. Don't, if someone, makes an ageist joke, you might say, well, gee, would you make a similar gag on the basis of who someone slept with or what color their skin is? Why do how come this gets past you, or how do it's hard. It takes courage, but there are ways to do it that are not confrontative. What do you mean by that is always a
Mm-hmm.
really good sort of, gee, tell me more, or how come you picked this card? Because if only when we start to challenge it in the world around us do we really start to change the culture.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It comes from the personal. When people say to me, "Okay, grandma," I'm like, "Yeah, exactly. You should be so lucky, right?" So I'm going to take it from the personal to the organizations that can support pledging against ageism. I'm going to pass the mic over at this point to Evelyn, who is going to speak to the Elder Wisdom Pledge and community support that she sees in action at the Village of Erin Meadows.
Okay, now um, on our podcast site or hashtag Elder Wisdom, we do have the Elder Wisdom Pledge, which is meant to challenge the stigma and ageism of older adults faced in society. And it reminds us of the wealth of wisdom that our older adults offer, and in doing so, it helps restore them to a place of reverence. One of the visible ways we do this is through the green bench, which is a symbol of elder wisdom, both physically and virtually. And the bench gives us a chance to sit down alongside a senior, share a conversation, or give advice. Um, I find it personally a very good way to sit down and chat with the people, young ones, older ones, visitors here at Erin Meadows. And it gives them a chance too to relate and find out that we're not, you know, old fogies anymore. Most of us are quite intelligent, uh, very approachable. It gives people a chance to see that seniors are still active, both mentally and physically, as much as they can, and interested in a lot of things. One of the other interesting parts of the pledge site, I think you'll find, is that we have a wisdom bank. And I recently was in there looking at it, and it's really sort of follows some of the things that you do, because there are collections of stories, videos, some poems that um, really honor the wisdom of the elders and gives you a really good insight into how varied and interesting we can be. I hope you'll find that too.
I look forward to checking it out.
Good. Uh, yeah, it's something that Ron Schlegel, who founded the Schlegel Homes, have said that the greatest untapped resource in Canada, and in fact in the world, is the collective wisdom of our elders. And the find some very interesting remarks and interests that most of our residents have.
Have you encountered other organizations, Ashton, that have taken similar pledges, or government bodies?
I don't know about government bodies. I do know, well, one of the things I like to tell people is that a global movement to raise awareness of ageism and how to end it is underway. And if they want to know how I know that, I mention a site that I co-founded with two colleagues called Old School, which is the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. And when we launched it in 2018, we didn't even have a campaigns section, and it is now one of our fastest growing. The latest to join was England, which launched a national campaign called Age Without Limits in January of 2024. But the very first national campaign was in Australia called Every Age Counts. And they actually brought me over to tour Australia. It was amazing. And one of the first things they did was have a very simple pledge that lets people know what ageism is, and people sign it and attest that they will speak up about it. So I think it's a very effective mechanism.
Sounds similar to the pledge that we have too. You know, there's another part of doing something about ageism, and that's some of the activities that Schlegel villages promote. They've tried to promote connecting the generations in a lot of various ways. Some of the homes have various activities. For example, they have an intergenerational jamboree. They offer volunteer opportunities, especially helping with the technical problems. Where they invite students from the nearby high schools or colleges. Grandparents' Day programs, and even having some learning programs inside of the residents themselves. And it's been quite interesting to see the interaction. It works out quite well, and it really helps to give younger people or students a chance to learn what seniors are like, not just old bodies kind of thing. So we found that very interesting and well done.
Yeah, I host another podcast series called Go To Grandma, and I've had experts on the show talk about the importance of the grandparent relationship, which you just briefly talked about, Evelyn, and the importance of grandkids being close with their grandparents, because it doesn't occur to them, especially when they're young, that age is even a factor in terms of what grandparents can or can't do. Have you read about that as well, Ashton?
Well, children are born without bias. We're all
Mm-hmm.
born, free will. We'll play with anyone. We don't make assumptions. But attitudes towards age, just like attitudes towards race and gender, do start to form in early childhood. People pick them up, kids pick them up from their parents, their communities, from children's books. Think about all the children's books that either have, like, the cranky Homer Simpson or the passive granny rocking in a corner. Don't get me started on Disney movies. But we do know that contact with people of all ages is the most effective way to undo age bias, just as contact with people of different races is the way in integration. When we're around people who do not look like us, it's very hard to hang on to the notion that everyone of a certain ethnicity, of a certain sports team, it doesn't matter. We are tribal. We form affiliations. But once you are exposed to people from that group, you realize, like, I like some of them, I don't like some of them. They're different from each other, right? So I did have, Robert Butler was a wonderful physician, geriatrician, who coined the term ageism, and he was raised by his grandparents. And at one point, I started early on, I was like trying to figure out, like, what is it that brings people into the field of geriatrics and gerontology when there's so much aversion to it in the culture, which I scientifically call age cooties. And it is very often a beloved grandparent, or being raised by a grandparent, or also living in mixed age communities, which was the case when human beings lived in little villages scattered all over the world. As we have industrialized and urbanized, that has fractured these mixed age communities. They are rarer now than they used to be. We live in more age silos than we used to.
Yeah, and I think this is a great lead in, Ashton, to really diving into your book, which addresses all aspects of ageism. The book, again, is called This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism. And I had some key takeaways from the book, and I wanted to
Super fun to read. I want to hear that.
it's very fun to it's very readable. Do you know what I mean? I love the way that you interweave stories and facts and figures. And one of the chapters that really stood out to me was the economic impact of ageism, because I think that doesn't get enough attention. We hear, well, it's insulting to be called old, or wrinkles aren't ugly. But at the end of the day, let's look at what are the economic implications of ageism, because it's a real thing, and the financial insecurity that gets faced by older adults. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit in terms of the harm that is given because of this prejudice against older people.
Oh my gosh, it's everywhere. I mean, if I mean, I think it's 4 out of 5 Americans in the workforce report either encountering or witnessing ageism. And of course, if older people are forced out of the job market, who is going to support us? The I mean, and there are all sorts of mainstream organizations now, from AARP to the World Economic Forum, that report now on the need to accommodate an older workforce in order to keep economies going. If older people don't have money, they're not going to be able to purchase things, which also harms the economy. And these amount to the billions of dollars nationally and trillions internationally. The purchasing power of ageism. One sort of shocking manifestation of ageism, given that we live in a hyper-capitalist society, is that so many marketers and advertisers and PR people don't even try and sell us things. They just assume that, the market, that older people, don't care what we wear or don't shop or whatever, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Older people have more purchasing power than younger people in general, because we have had more time to accumulate resources and perhaps have fewer expenses than we did when we were younger. So the costs just ripple out. There's a massive cost to ageism in healthcare. I'll try and look it up. That the cost of not providing adequate healthcare to older people costs the U.S. economy billions of dollars every year just in healthcare, because then you end up not taking care of yourself and ending up sicker and requiring more intensive care, which is a much bigger cost than looking after your health along the line.
Absolutely. And when you talk about marketers, et cetera, that's so true. And if there is an ad that's targeted towards us, what do we look like, right? I mean, it's the gray-haired granny with the glasses and there's no marketer that's doing a good job, in my opinion, right now of addressing this market.
And one of my many pet peeves is those marketing checklists that, ask what age group you're in, 25 to 32, 32 to 37, and so on, and then end at 65. Often they end at 50, as though everyone over 50 buys the same things, does the same stuff. And I think sometimes I think if I could put just one fact about aging in everyone's bonnet, it would be this: the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. We think, this idea of the elderly, that everyone ends up, in some gray lumpen mass after age XYZ, when in fact, every newborn is unique. Every 17-year-old is unique, but 17-year-olds are way more alike cognitively, socially, physically, developmentally than 47-year-olds are, and so on out. So the more stereotypes are always incorrect and problematic, of course, but the older the group you're stereotyping, the less accurate it is. The older the person, the less their age reveals about what they are capable of or interested in. So the more foolish and ignorant it is to generalize about older people. Some older people are wise. Some older people don't seem to have learned a thing along the way. You just can't tell. It's utterly individual.
Yep. If you've met one 80-year-old, you've met one 80-year-old, right? You haven't met them all.
And I found that study, Health Costs of Ageism, this is just in the U.S., in medical care, calculated at $63 billion annually. And that's from the Yale School of Public Health. That's just the cost annually of ageism in medicine alone.
It's crazy.
Well, Ashton, one of the areas that we're faced with on a daily basis is the media, and they constantly portray elderly people as either frail, needing care, or they're happy go lucky retirees. Uh, how can we do something to combat that attitude that they keep portraying and that we're inundated with every day?
Yeah. I think you're setting a number of fabulous examples and very tangible examples that you are making accessible to the public of how to combat it by insisting on being represented as your full self. I will also say that I think we have to be careful not to sort of gray wash the um, the fact that aging does involve physical decline. Cognitive decline is not inevitable by any means. Most of us slow a little bit, but the ability to process as fast and remember the name of the movie you saw with what's her name last week, but that's all we lose, right? And I think it's very important not to careen to the other end of the spectrum, which is to say, none of those things will happen to me if I eat enough kale or, do enough sit-ups. Some part of your body is going to slow down, and we need to acknowledge that and be careful not to hold up an example of aging of the skydiving octogenarians. God bless them. May they jump out of planes as long as they can afford to do so. But to make it clear that they are outliers, just as the person with early onset Alzheimer's is an outlier. And to make it clear, to represent older people in all our diversity, which includes people using walkers, which includes people who are hearing impaired, because we age well, not by pretending that's never going to happen to us, but by adapting to the changes that occur. And a change for you, you might have a health problem that will never happen to me. I might have a health problem that is, I happen to have arthritis. I had a total shoulder replacement 2 years ago. If I played tennis, it would have really messed me up. Luckily, I'm a couch potato, so it didn't. That's a little tiny example, but an impairment for me might not be, you might not even notice it, and vice versa. We do these things in different rates, at different ways. The losses affect each of us differently. And of course, there are all kinds of gains as well. So the really important thing to do is to depict older people in all our diversity, which includes the really active people, but above all the rest of us, most of us by definition, are going to end up in the messy middle, not functioning the way we did when we were 20, but oftentimes in certain arenas functioning better, right? So again, depict the variety, the diversity of oldness.
Yeah, and you talk in the book about all aging is successful, not just the sporty version, which I really like. It's when people say someone's aging successfully, we think about that skydiver, but everybody has their version of everyone is aging successfully, or as you say, they're dead.
Right. Why should we succeed or fail at aging, right? We don't succeed or fail at childhood. It's not binary. And success for you is different from success for me, right? Because different things matter to you than matter to me. And you have access to different things.
In the book, you also talk a lot about the myths about aging, and there are so many myths and stereotypes. We could spend the rest of the show talking about that. But one of the ones that you address is that older adults are a burden on society. This is a myth. Why is this myth around, and what's the counter argument to that?
Well, that's, a huge question with a, several chapter long answer.
Yes.
It relates, it relates in part to, I would say the biggest sort of meta answer is that in anxious times, we look for scapegoats. And these, God knows, are anxious times, and older people come in handy for that. Population aging is real. Everywhere in the world, people are living longer. And this is an amazing accomplishment. It is a triumph of public health. It means that we have around the world access to the social and economic capital of millions more healthy, educated adults than ever before in human history. The last time there was another living generation was the Paleolithic era. And that's the grandmother hypothesis, that once there was a third living generation, that's when art happened. That's when music happened. We are at a fascinating evolutionary threshold. But the thought of a lot of old people makes a lot of people nervous because of ageism, because of ableism, which is prejudice around physical and cognitive capacity. So you have these metaphors about the gray tsunami, and old people are going to come in and suck all the good stuff out to sea and not leave anything for young people. There is no truth to those. We are in the US, in the middle of the biggest wealth transfer in history, as people my age and above, I was born in 1952, start to die off and leave our assets to the people behind us, which is, of course, the way it should be. So the big issue here is not that older people are greedy or are any one thing. The biggest issue is inequality within any age group. You hear a lot of talk about how millennials aren't being able to buy houses today and having a hard time reaching material security at the same age that their parents did. But that is true of some millennials. Many millennials are well off. The issue is always inequity and disparities, inequalities within any age group far exceed, right? The 99% is made up of rich people and poor people, right?
Right.
It's really, really just so important never to generalize on the basis of age, because class above all, and ethnicity and gender all play a much, much bigger role in shaping our lives and our access to opportunity.
How will we know, do you think, Ashton, that we've made strides against fighting ageism? What are the markers that you sort of look?
Well, think about, I mean, I know we are because of the campaigns section of Old School. I know we are from my own professional trajectory because, when I started out, I had to, beg people to just, could you put ageism, somewhere on the list? Could you mention it? Could you put it at the bottom of your to-do list? And now it's almost always mentioned. Here's an example. We're in the middle of a presidential campaign, and there's tremendous talk about the ages of the presidential candidates. No matter where people are on the political spectrum, almost anyone who starts in on this topic says, I know this is ageist, but I think they're too old to run. The fact that they say, I know this is ageist, is huge because, again, the first step in countering bias is becoming aware of it. Ageism is part of so many more conversations than it was even a year ago. I'm pretty sure about that. I'd like to see if that's your experience too.
I think so. Yeah.
I think so as well.
Yeah. It's not, we all see what we want to see, of course, but, it's really happening. So that is fantastic. Movements have, they need to get to a certain point, and then we reach tipping points. And I think, I don't know what the tipping point is. Maybe there's 1,000 tipping points, but if the first step is awareness, we have made enormous progress on that front just in the last year alone.
The campaigns that are going on there right now are very enlightening. It was the cover on the New Yorker magazine that showed both of the candidates with walkers and so on, and making fun of the fact of their age. I think was rather not inspiring at all. I think everybody came down on the New Yorker for that cover story.
Exactly. They got a lot of blowback. It was one that showed, I think, I'm sure we're talking about the same one, Nancy Pelosi and Trump and Biden,
Yes.
and perhaps someone else,
Trump.
in a cartoon at a foot race, using walkers. And, the big picture here, aside from the fact that they don't use walkers, it shouldn't matter if they use walkers. It is not, people who use walkers can be smart as whips, and it is not okay to mock or denigrate or, someone because they have a physical impairment. Nothing about that is okay.
That's right.
And they got a lot of heat for that, and that was very gratifying. Thanks for mentioning that.
Oh, what surprising throughout all this campaign, the fact that 80-year-olds are, people think, oh, who wants them as president? They're not going to be able to do the job. But we have to think of the fact that it's not a physical situation all the time. I mean, we did have a president in the past, Roosevelt, who wasn't physically 100%.
And also, a good litmus test is, generalizations on the basis of age are no more acceptable than generalizations on the basis of gender or race or anything else. We would never say someone is too fat to be president, or too gay to be president, or too dark skinned to be president, and too old to be president is no more acceptable. The issue is capacity, and capacity of certain types does decline with age. There is absolutely nothing wrong, in my opinion, with calling the candidates old. They're in their 80s or late 70s. That's old. Old should not be a slur. It is a fact, right? But when we move from there to generalizing about their capacities on the basis of age, that's what makes it ageist and ableist if we are generalizing about their physical or cognitive capacities. And that is not okay. That is denigration, and it even, in my opinion, veers into hate speech.
That's true. I agree with you. Yes. Too much of that is carried over to the rest of the aging population, and it shouldn't be. I mean, I loved a quote I recently read from Rita Moreno, recently passed away, and she said, "All my life I faced sexism and racism, and then at 40, ageism."
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, it's
Yep. Madonna too. She's faced ageism all her life. And, whether you love Madonna or hate Madonna, she has been really outspoken about ageism her entire career. The reason she's gotten so much heat is because she dares to be sexual as an older woman. And that makes a lot of people really nervous. And I really applaud her courage. And she has named ageism for 50 years. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think you saw your agreement at the program, the Bachelor, or Golden Bachelor, I should say, where you thought that was a great idea to have them look at people who are elderly, shall I say, but looking very healthy, very good, and their sexual interests. And yeah, it was a great change, and it really brought a lot of people, interested in seeing how that would develop, and they did a great job.
I agree.
Ashton, I need to ask you, what is your vision for the future in terms of ageism, and what steps do you think are necessary to achieve that vision? Can you share that with us?
Every so often someone will say, well, how are we going to end ageism?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we will ever end ageism because, there's always those people, because we are tribal. But the real, both the sort of sobering and also uplifting piece of that is that ageism is part of a system of oppression. We are not going to get rid of ageism without addressing sexism and gender inequality, because aging is gendered. Right? Women age differently because we get the double whammy of ageism and sexism. We're not going to undo ageism without addressing racism, because racism denies to multitudes of Black and brown people everywhere the chance to age at all. We're not going to undo ageism until we undo ableism, stigma, and prejudice around physical and cognitive capacity, because much of what we think of as ageism actually has to do with the very human fear that we need to acknowledge, right, of loss of capacity. So all these forms, these systems of prejudice and oppression are interlocking, and they reinforce and support each other. But the uplifting piece of that, because I was, sitting one night and thinking, God, that's a lot of weight. If you think of it as overlapping layers of things standing between us and a fairer world, here's the thing. Any form of activism, of advocacy, is intersectional too, right? When we chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlies any one of these biases, we chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlie them all. So if you are working to become less racist or working to, think more in a more nuanced way about the loss of physical capacity, that process of unlearning is also helping you unlearn how to address other forms of stereotype. It's all one struggle. I love a quote by a wonderful poet, African-American woman, sadly dead, named Audre Lorde. She said, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't lead single issue lives." So when we push back against any form of prejudice, we are also helping to undo all the others.
Well, normally, Ashton, I end this podcast interview with sharing some words of wisdom, but that whole last answer there, that has got to be your words of wisdom on the subject of aging and just the sort of your feelings around elder wisdom and what you could share with our listeners today. We really, really appreciate your time today. And again, for anyone who is listening, the book is called This Chair Box, A Manifesto Against Ageism. It's Ashton Applewhite. You can find her old school site, which has got great resources for everyone on. I love Yo, Is This Ageist, where you did just recently address the presidential billboards and campaigns. I'm going to say thanks so much for this episode. I don't know if Evelyn wants to also weigh in.
Yes, I would like to leave the fact that I encourage everyone to go into the old school site. It's oldschool.info. There's so much tremendous information there, toolkits, video games, everything that you'd like to learn about aging and things that you can do to help prevent or encourage people to ignore the fact that they are aging themselves. Go to it. And thank you, Ashton. It's been a very encouraging conversation with you, and I hope we'll be able to have another one in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us on the Green Bench today as well. On behalf of my co-host, Evelyn Brindle, thanks for letting us share these stories of elder wisdom. We'd love to have you subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done so, but we'd also love to hear your words of wisdom on social media. Please do using the hashtag elderwisdom, which will also help others to find us on this Green Bench. You can easily find it by going to elderwisdom.ca and following the link. Take a look at the Elder Wisdom Pledge Against Ageism while you're there, and please think about signing it. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to sharing some more elder wisdom with you on the next episode of Stories from the Green Bench.
Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench, is brought to you by Schlegel Villages, a complete continuum of care, offering independent living to long-term care, celebrating and honoring the wisdom of the elder. To learn more about us, please go to our website, schlegelvillages.com.